All right. Welcome to Decred Assembly. We're in episode 19 today, and we're going to be taking a look at the roadmap. So the 2018 Decred roadmap. And here we have Dave Collins.
Hey, how's it going?
Got Marco Puirboom.
What's up?
And Jake Yoakum Pyatt is going to be joining us. He's having a little technical difficulty, but he'll jump on when he gets a chance. Yeah, but we're excited to be able to kind of go and dive a little bit deeper into some of the details about the roadmap itself. And yeah, we'll get right into it. We'll give Jake a couple minutes, but yeah, I mean, oh, looks like he just popped on. So, hey, Jake.
Hey, guys.
Perfect. Well, welcome. We're excited to have you guys all. I was just telling everybody, we're going to take a little bit of a bird's eye view and kind of nitpick through some of the pieces of the roadmap and yes, kind of get some of your feedback on it as well. So yeah, let's get right into it. Kind of starting from the entire deal. I know you guys kind of came out the roadmap and this time you didn't have any timelines, and I really like that just because kind of the under promising, over delivering aspects of the deal. Do you guys want to kind of touch on why that changed?
I could, I'll get into that one a little bit. Is really, from a community management standpoint, I think it's important to, manage everybody's expectations reasonably. And one thing that, that happens, especially when you're doing things like anything custom, like whether we're talking, custom software, custom design work, custom anything. When you're doing custom work, it's very easy to give a lead time and be like, oh, it's going to take us 3 months to finish a certain piece of work. And then, it just ends up going on. And then there's issues that occur when you're doing this custom stuff. You start working and you're like, oh, this is only going to take 3 months to do. And then it's like it rapidly, oh, well, we forgot about this, we forgot about that. So, 3 months can easily become 4 or 5 or 6. And, we're trying to just manage people's expectations. So instead of putting a date on everything, we put everything roughly in the sequence we thought that we could have things materialize for users. So we try to do a better job of managing people's expectations instead of going, setting artificial deadlines for when we're going to get our work done.
One thing I'd add there too is that in the software engineering world, a common thing that we actually have is called a stretch goal. And the basic principle of that is that it's probably not something you're going to get done, but you aim for it. And because of that, the idea is that, if you're always aiming for getting more done than you probably can, then you end up with more deliverables in the long run. However, sharing that sets false expectations, as Jake was just explaining, where in general, I think we notice that people don't seem to understand that concept. Oh, well, you said it would be there. Why isn't it, kind of thing, right? And so some of it comes down, I think, to just the way that the software engineering process works internally versus the external view of it.
So let me add to that as well. So as a guy who's worked in software engineering for actually more than 1 decade at this point, the reality is the software is hard, and sometimes some things just take a little bit longer. And business has very often actually unfair expectations of what can be done, what can be reasonably done. And I guess we ran into that a little bit, and people got the panties a little bit in the wad. So I think that Jake did the right thing by simplifying the roadmap and actually removing hard dates.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I think the full custom piece that you mentioned is definitely crucial because you guys aren't just ripping things off from other projects. You guys are developing a lot of this from the ground up, most of it from the ground up. And that takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of time to work through all the bugs and use a fine tooth comb to go through it all. So definitely agree. And yeah, I'm excited. And I think all of us are excited to, see what is in store for 2018. But getting right into it, let's just kind of start to look at each piece and kind of work our way down. So with the simple payment verification system, it seems like it's going to be something pretty major, just looking at the fact that, a 2 gigabyte chain can be, squeezed down to 66 megabytes. Kind of what are the implications with that, and what can we expect as far as the use cases with the SPV?
I can take that one. So one of the biggest things that there is sort of an SPV mode in Bitcoin too, and I kind of want to point this out to compare the differences here, is that The problem, there are several issues with the one in Bitcoin, in the sense that it basically puts all of the workload on all of the full nodes that are out there on the network. And it also has very poor privacy because it's very simple due to the way that the filters have to be reloaded. Think of it, I guess the easiest way to put it is that you constantly have to update what the server is expected to send you. And as you're doing those updates, it allows the server to figure out what it is you're really requesting. So it's bad for privacy. So the approach that we're taking is that it kind of reverses it, in the sense is that these filters get committed to every block. So the data is just there for everybody, for all these SPV clients out there to request. But it's very compact, as you mentioned, 66 meg versus a couple of gig. So then what can happen is it will allow these SPV or these wallets, these mobile wallets, to download that smaller amount of data and be able to figure out what transactions belong to them and which blocks they need to request without the privacy implications. So in short, it gives you a fast way and a very low overhead way to trustlessly and privately sync your wallet, versus today where you need to have the entire chain. It takes a while to download the entire 2 gig and to make sure everything connects up properly. The other big benefit that it has is that it will allow these wallets to actually prove whether or not the data that you're getting is correct. Another very common model, most actually wallets that are light wallets today that exist, the way that they actually work is they connect to a centralized server controlled by somebody. I mean, I'll use Exodus as an example. It's a very nice wallet, but their model is very common in the light wallet space, is that what's really happening is you're connecting out to a centralized server. You're asking the API, hey, what's my balance? Hey, what are my transactions? You're asking it for all this information. And you just have to trust that server is not lying to you. They're not actually checking that it's correct. So they could tell you, for example, your wallet that, hey, this transaction's yours, and you might adjust your balance accordingly when it's really not. So what this SPV mode does is, because these filters are actually commitments, or perhaps in another way to put that into less technical terms, is that proofs. It allows the software to prove, yes, this really is my transaction. Yes, it really did belong to a block that's on the blockchain. And yes, this block really is a part of the blockchain. And it can do all that without having the entire blockchain. And that's what makes it really exciting and unique.
So I do have something to add there, which is in terms of how we're going to end up implementing it, is that the guts of the work is happening. That is, the DCRD has committed filters support. It can serve the committed filters, and then on top of that, we have plans for how we're going to integrate that, just like Dave was saying with the commitments. The idea that you can prove that a particular filter applies to a particular block. That part is currently missing, and that's because that's a consensus change. And we probably won't get to that for the next few months, but that's ultimately where the ship's headed, which is that we'll add these commitments to the block headers so that you can be completely sure that the filters are correct. Even if we don't add any additional verification, the filters are actually pretty useful by themselves, in the sense that the worst case scenario you can experience as an SPV wallet user is that someone can generate a false negative. It's false positives are pretty much impossible to generate, in the sense that, let's say somebody creates fake or false or incorrect filters. They serve you a filter. The worst case that can happen is that, let's say they send you a filter that has a fake payment in it. Well, then you go and download the block. You check the block, it doesn't match the block header, and then that, you basically can't do a false positive. You can create a false positive to trigger a download of a block, but that's a sort of worst case scenario. And then, on the false negative side, the worst case you could do is that if someone is connected to a particular daemon, the daemon could forge a filter, and then you could miss a payment. But the level of coordination that you need to have between the various counterparties here would be pretty heavy duty. So even in the absence of a commitment or a filter chain, which are, the two solutions for making this really solid, the technology as a standalone without those pieces is still pretty strong.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, and I think it gives a good picture of what the implications are of the SPV system and kind of how they do allow for a faster and approvable way to show that you actually are dealing with your money and the balances that you think that are actually there, and you have a way to prove that it's legitimate. So, thanks for that. Going into Politeia.
I might jump in. There was one more thing I forgot to mention that probably is one of the most important things that we kind of took for granted, I think, is that at a really, really high level, what it's going to let you do is, right now when you download the wallet and you get started, it probably takes a couple, 2-3 hours, depending on your connection to get started. With SPV, you'll get started within, say, 10 minutes. So much faster startup. That's probably really the really high level why it really matters to people the most. Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe, hopefully not being presumptuous, but that would allow, a mobile platform to be able to be used a lot easier with that level of memory necessary going forward. Would that be correct?
Correct. That's actually the only way to realistically have a mobile wallet is to have support for this. I mean, it could work with the blockchain, but as you mentioned, the requirements are so high that even the best phones out on the market right now would struggle to keep up with that level of requirement. But with SPV, it's very low requirements, and so you can support mobile very well.
No, that's great. Moving on into the next section, Politeia, the proposal system. I know it was really exciting. We had the launch party and the contest, and it went really well. And there's some really cool use cases for the system. On the front end, it's the proposal system to be able to propose different ideas for implementations with Decred. But kind of going forward, we had the contest, and the system is slowly but surely being integrated. Kind of what is there for the community to expect on that front? What does it look like to just have the proposal system versus like the contest users using the Politeia system? Do they go together? Would it be a separate system? Kind of what does that look like?
So I can take that one. So currently we are building out the tools so that people can actually use it. The big missing piece right now that I'm actually trying to finalize is actually a little text-based utility that does the voting piece, so the client voting piece. So in other words, it actually pulls the active proposals from Politeia, which is a server-side portion, of course. Then with some magic in crypto, signs a vote and then sends it back over, and then the Politeia side can figure out it was a valid vote, and therefore you can only vote once, and have all those desired features. So that is the big missing piece. Once that goes in, then we need to integrate what went in. So that code actually needs to then be replicated or moved into the Decrediton, so you can do it straight from the wallet. And there's some desire to do it on the website as well, but I haven't quite cracked that egg yet. So once we have the tools working, then we'll understand exactly what the flow is going to look like. And at that point, it'll be a lot simpler to see what needs to be done on the website and what the simplest form would look like.
Great. Yeah, I mean that's going to be major, and I know a lot of people are looking forward to it, and it's really exciting, and I know it's getting closer. So thanks for that. As far as the Lightning Network goes, if we want to take a look at that, I know there's going to be a roundtable episode coming out soon that's going to touch a little bit on there, but anything that you guys want to touch on in regards to the Lightning Network?
Well, I figure, it's worth circling back to say a little bit more about Politeia. Something I'm really excited about is that to date, there's a lot of sort of centralized decision making that has, needed to occur in order for the project to keep ticking over. And I'm very keen to put an end to that. And, Politeia voting will allow us to do that. Even though the Politeia voting is basically, it's soft sovereignty, it's soft signaling. So when people vote, it isn't necessarily cryptographically binding on chain yet. But the idea is that we will use that soft signaling to direct things like expenditures and, basically control the flow of the development organization funds. So I'm really, I mean, as much as I'm sure Marco's excited to get done with the technical side of it, I'm very excited to, have it in play so that these big project level decisions can be made by the stakeholders and not by, me unilaterally or, other internal project members.
Yeah, let me touch on that a little bit. So obviously, I'm always, I've been heads down into that code. Actually, Jake helped me out of the weeds a couple of days back. So that said, so the technical details are interesting, and we are finally making some good progress. But the system itself is going to be very exciting for the users, because it's going to be very visible, so everyone gets to participate. So even though certain parts are still going to be manual, we are going to drastically add the ability for people to interact with the project, right? And then stakeholders are going to be able to directly propose things and actually direct things. So it is going to be step one. And even though it's going to be somewhat manual, it is going to, again, give us the tools and also just figure out the process. So what is reasonable? What isn't reasonable? What can we do with the system? What cannot do with the system? So people should not forget that this is an experiment, and we're going to have a couple of false starts. Some things are going to go well, some things are not going to go well, and we just need to learn from that, right? So we need to figure out, okay, so this particular proposal, that became a flaming turd, so let's not do that again, right? But you know what? Hey, these guys came up with something really good. That can be the model that then we use, and then we automate.
No, that's great. And actually, I think that's a better segue into the decentralized autonomous entities piece. I'm not sure if that is kind of a correlating aspect to the Politeia system that you were mentioning, Jake, as far as being able to kind of, let go of the reins in some sense and allow things to be more automated in the sense of decision making. But kind of what would that piece look like, and is it directly correlated to Politeia?
So you're asking about the DAEs, just to clarify?
Yes, yeah, the DAE aspect of things.
Well, you can think about it like this: is that in the case of the stakeholder directed DAO, which is really what we're building out with Politeia, ultimately those these votes in Politeia will descend to an on-chain binding way of disbursing the dev funds. So that's sort of where that piece is headed. And that piece by itself is interesting. But where we see really things going is into these things that, basically a user's ability to create their own DAO or DAO-like structure. Now, in the case, Ethereum has already taken a shot at doing this, and they've met with so much success that their blockchain has become substantially congested, especially when there's like a hot ICO or something, or there's a lot of activity. They basically run out of space on chain. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on more the nuts and bolts use cases, as opposed to the speculative, tokenized, casinoization of everything. And from a nuts and bolts perspective, corporate entities are a huge part of our modern lives here on planet Earth, which is that 10 of us might sit down and we all agree on certain things, but then maybe we want to formalize that. We want to make a contract that says there's 10 of us, each of us own 10% of some company, and this company, when there's votes and then and there's consensus within that smaller group, the company will take certain actions, like it'll buy a piece of property or invest in Decred, or pretty much anything else. It'll buy a jet ski or whatever, whatever the group wants to do. And I feel like that that use case has been mostly overlooked, which is everyone else is focusing on, oh, how do I make tokens, and how do I make a casino for the tokens before the tokens actually do anything. And we want to take the decentralized part of it, make it useful, and make it a little bit less speculative than, say, other projects have to date. So that's sort of where we're going with it. And I feel like what we've done with Decred is we have the luxury of having the ticket pool, to dictate what does and doesn't happen. And in the case of a DAE, you're not going to have a ticket pool. And I'm not going to get in too much into the details of what of how we plan to do what we plan to do. But suffice it to say, it's going to be more traditional corporate entity than, tokenized casino entity.
No, that's great, and that's very helpful. And do you know if that, for people, because this is an open source project, would that be something where they, would they have to pay for that proposal system and kind of have a payment structure built into that, or would that be something a company could just take the code for and just have an implementation of the code base?
I'll take that one. So we are an open source community. We've always developed in the open source, and this code is not going to be any different. So the answer is yes, people will be able to start using it. Obviously, what we're trying to get to here is that people are going to use the Decred blockchain for these things, right? So that is our ultimate goal here. But so yes is the answer. Yes, free.
Good. No, and I know that's exciting for a lot of users because, even for, simple use cases, not just a company, but, just amongst friends, your example exactly, Jake, if we want to prove that, oh, we are part owners on this yacht, you can go ahead and put that into the system and you can cryptographically prove that, yes, we did sign this agreement, or we are the owners of this thing. So that's really neat. Any other thoughts on the DAE?
Well, the DAE is really, the game is to make decentralization useful, not in a speculative capacity. And that's really sort of what we're aiming to do is, people's ability to form LLCs or, C Corps or whatever, that provides a lot of utility, and it doesn't even necessarily need to involve speculation. It could just be an investment vehicle. It could be, a method of protecting your assets. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can go with traditional corporate entities. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to sort of, turn Decred into what I would consider to be a proper digital state by offering people, the ability to create these entities. We're aiming to sort of create a new jurisdiction where people can, not have to worry about the enforcement of laws the same way because they're cryptographically enforced, as opposed to, oh, somebody broke an operating agreement and spent the money in the account and went to the casino, or, like they smashed the yacht into the wall, and what do we do now? So instead of, sort of pushing that off to a secondary system like a legal system, we're kind of aiming to bring it back and, have crypto be that middle ground that, the burgeoning legal system has traditionally been.
So it's kind of like a crypto trust in a sense.
It would be like a jurisdiction where crypto trusts can be created at the snap of a finger.
I kind of want to add something here, though. So Jake is a big thinker, so there's at least 18 steps between right where we are today and where we're going to get to that DAE. So, so let me just level set the expectations here a little bit. So there's many steps, and some of them are actually pretty complex, and there's a lot of code involved there. So, so let's not get too much ahead of ourselves. There's going to be a lot of code and a lot of development happening in this area.
Yeah, but exciting ideas nonetheless, and it's an exciting prospect that it is at least on the back burner, for those higher level pieces of the DAE, which is really, really cool. Kind of jumping into the next piece. Actually, did anyone else have any thoughts on the DAE before we move on? Cool. So getting into the Lightning Network, again, I don't want to touch on it too much because, again, we're going to have a roundtable episode coming out from Luke on the Lightning Network itself. But, as far as the second layer solution working with Decred rather, what does that look like? Because a lot of projects in the Lightning Labs themselves are talking about the second layer solution. Bitcoin's really excited about this second layer solution. And what does that look like? Is it an atomic swap? Is it a way to just do a really quick escrow for exchanging X for Y? Just a really simple explanation of what is the Lightning Network.
Sure, I'll take it. So at a high level, it's not a perfect analogy, but you can kind of think of it like a bar tab, right? You go into a bar, you drink a bunch of alcohol, and then at the end of the night, you settle up once, rather than giving them your credit card 50 times throughout the night. That's really kind of what it does, in the sense that every transaction doesn't go on chain. And so I'll talk about this a little bit because there is a raging debate about this all the time, where certain people think that you can put every transaction on the chain and it's okay because hardware is just going to scale and keep up with it. But if we look at this from a pure math perspective, and let's just break it down, and I'm not going to go too in depth here, but just assume, which by the way, this is completely impossible. You can never do it, but assume you could make somehow magically you can make a single transaction only take 1 byte. That's it, 1 single byte. Even if you can do that, to do 3,000 transactions a second, which is the typical values Visa processes, To do that, that means that it would take 88 gigabytes per year, even if you could magically get it down to a byte. The reality is transactions are more like 250 bytes, which takes you up to 22 terabytes a year. Like, that is just not a tenable solution. It will never work. Anybody who is telling you that that's the way to go forward, I think they're missing something very fundamental there. That cannot work. So the idea is that you have to somehow get that traffic off of the chain. And it needs to be in these second layer solutions. And this is where the Lightning Network comes into that sort of bar tab analogy. In effect, what happens is you open up what are called payment channels with some entity. So we'll use a common one, like most everybody probably has an exchange account with, say, Bittrex or Politeia. So you would open up a channel maybe with one of those exchanges. They are going to have a channel open with somebody else. So now the way that this works is that, let's say that I want to send some Decred to you, Trace, across Lightning Network. Basically what happens is that information gets routed through one of those third parties, through Politeia or Bittrex. But it does so, and this is where the bar tab analogy breaks down, because in this case, what happens is it's done in such a way that the funds can't be stolen. It's technical to describe, and I'm sure the roundtable will go into that a little bit more, but it uses cryptographic primitives to ensure that neither one of us can steal from each other. But this all happens off chain. And then eventually, after a whole lot of these transactions happen, there's a single settlement transaction, which is the final amount. So if we kind of use just a little bit of numbers there to perhaps make it more clear, it would be like, so I send you 20 Decred, you send me back 10 Decred, I send you another 5. And so our total amount there, the final amount is, so 20 went to you, 10 went back to me, minus 10, that's 10, and then I sent 5 back. So the net amount means 15 Decred goes to you. So the only transaction that would show up on chain is that one transaction which actually transfers 15 Decred, even though we could have had 1 million or 1 billion different transactions off chain for every one of those little tiny differences. And so, but when you're only talking about 2 people, it might not seem as exciting. But where it really starts to get exciting is the fact that you start to think that you can go through more than one hop. You can have 7 intermediaries, 10 intermediaries. And so you create this big mesh routed network where everything is happening and everybody is going through multiple third parties. And it kind of, sounds all complicated, but the bottom line is that the vast majority of transactions that happen will never be seen on chain. And the only ones that ultimately happen are the final state after all this stuff happens. And you end up with one transaction on chain that sort of is the actual settlement. It's the thing that says that, okay, here are the final amounts. Now we close out the channel and everything is good. And it saves a ton of space. The other big thing that it provides that is really important is for instant transactions. Without getting too technical, you really can't do, they're called zero confirmation transactions, but think of it like when I very first send some Decred to you, if you need to wait a while before you actually send me the merchandise, whatever it is. Because if you don't, I could actually spend those coins. I could double spend those coins or spend them to somebody else, and then you'll never receive them. So that's a problem with on-chain transactions if you don't wait for these confirmations, or in other words, if you don't wait for the transaction to get mined into a block. In Decred, that's about 5 minutes on average. If you're buying things online, that may not seem like that big of a deal because you got to wait for shipping time anyway. But where it really matters is when you start to go into stores and say you're going to try to buy coffee. And you're going to try to use it as an actual currency at a point of sale type of situation. And there, people can't stand around for 10, 15, 20 minutes waiting to see if the transaction's confirmed before they can leave with their coffee. It's not reasonable. So what Lightning allows is that use case in the sense that you can be sure that once I've sent you that Lightning transaction, it's done. Even though it's not on chain yet, remember these things are all keeping things cryptographically provable so that even though it's not on chain yet, for all intents and purposes, it will be, and there's no way for you to steal it and get it back. So it allows these instant payments as well. Excuse me.
No, that's great.
I actually want to add one thing. So that was the simple Dave C explanation that took 5 minutes. So I actually like to look at Lightning in a different way, and that it's a prepaid debit card. So you basically have a Visa branded debit card, you charge $25 on it, and that is the maximum amount you can spend. So you can go buy your coffee with that. And it's going to be an instant transaction, right? Does that make sense? It's a slightly shorter version.
No, I think that's a great way to look at it. With kind of the groundwork pieces already being voted on by the community, we know these things are coming, and there's a general consensus for the Lightning Network. What about, Bitcoin in of itself? What are the odds of having a clean integration of the Lightning Network? Just from, for a quick, obviously we don't really know yet, but from you guys just kind of knowing how implementations have gone thus far.
Right. So the primarily the Lightning Network is being developed for Bitcoin. And any other coins that support their 3 or 4 different primitives that you need to support, which Decred does support now because we had a vote that enabled them. As long as your coin supports those primitives, you can make Lightning work on your coin. That doesn't mean that it's trivial. It does take quite a bit of work to make it happen, but you can make it happen. And so that's kind of the principle, is like it will work on Bitcoin, and for the same reason, by the way, in the sense that, as I was mentioning, the notion that you can always have every transaction on chain just doesn't work long term. It's fine as long as things are small, but when you really start to scale, just look at the math. It tells you it can't possibly work. So they have to do the same thing, in the sense is like the Lightning isn't the only solution, but what is clear is that there has to be an off-chain solution, because an on-chain one will never work long term.
So I wanted to say something, but now I just drew a blank. Sorry about that. I had something very profound to say. I think I just solved, the mystery of life, but no, I failed.
Well, I can bat clean up. So the comment I was going to make is that Dave talked about how it's basically cryptographically difficult or near impossible to steal funds out of these channels, and I think what's important to point out here is not that it's cryptographically protected quite as much as the incentives are aligned such that if you steal from this, from one of these channels, you've basically set yourself up to have your own funds stolen. So it's, so it's classic Bitcoin, Bitcoin stuff, in the sense that they're trying to align incentives so that people behave in a say rational and pleasant way, as opposed to necessarily preventing people from, from doing sketchy things.
So now I remember what I was trying to say, though. So the thing that I'm not sure is obvious, but it should be, is that this is going to be obviously a separate Lightning Network from Bitcoin, right? So these are not compatible. So even though we are reusing much of the same code, this one is Decred specific and will only work with Decred. So there is no interoperability between Bitcoin.
Currently, it's not impossible. You can have border nodes, but the initial release will correct. That is right. It will not be interoperating with any of the other Lightning Network, for example, the Bitcoin one. It's not impossible to make it work eventually, though.
Oh, that's great, guys. Thanks for touching on the Lightning Network. Now, it kind of came up a little bit, but the scalability piece. So I know in the roadmap, we were taking a look at some of the scalability optimizations. And so we had, the new signature algorithm, multi-peer sync support, and then the header commitments, and I think the Schnorr signatures as well. I mean, for somebody that's not technical, what's a good way of kind of being able to compartmentalize why these things are necessary?
I'll go first, then Jake will probably say it more simply. So basically, I think the kind of the key takeaway here is that even when you start to talk about Lightning, for example, and you get a lot of those transactions off chain, you still end up having a fair number of settlement transactions. And the more people that are using Lightning Network, the more of these settlement transactions you have. So you still do need to support on-chain scalability. Even if the majority of your transactions don't end up on there, you still do have a lot of transactions going on there. So basically, at a high level, or a simple way to look at it, is all these things, their entire purpose is to support on-chain scaling as well. It's why the Lightning is trying to move things off, and it goes with the off-chain approach scaling. These are focused more on the on-chain scaling side of it, which is also necessary. I mean, I could go more into depth into each one, but you said to try and not go too technical.
So if I had to summarize it here, what the scalability optimizations are really about is they're about getting more for less. And as all of us are aware, there's all kinds of software out there, but because we depend on cryptography and there's a lot of it, when you start talking about chains and transactions and how long it takes to download, how much space does a signature take up. Basically, these scalability optimizations are trying to reduce the footprint in terms of network traffic, storage, storage taken on your hard drive, and CPU cycles. So basically, we're trying to deliver the same, services and the same infrastructure just more efficiently, because, the user experience of people waiting 2 hours while their computer heats up really, really seriously to, use Decred is not so great. So basically, these optimizations allow people to get onboarded and jump on our ship without having to burn quite as much time or CPU cycles and all of these things. And technically speaking, there's a lot of these, optimizations are very interesting. They involve, novel applications of, of cryptographic tricks of various sorts. And, they're just very interesting from an academic and engineering perspective. But, from a user, if you're not an engineer, you're not like a person who wants to read about crypto, what this really comes down to is, how do I get Decred but not pay as much in terms of time and energy?
Right. I guess to kind of give you perhaps a speculative number anyways, whereas I mentioned earlier, right now it might take 2, 3, 4 hours, depending on your connection, to download the chain. Once all these things are in place, you could be up and running with the full node within probably 15 to 20 minutes. That's the idea, regardless of the size of the chain, by the way. So even if the chain, the chain will keep growing over time. So you could have a 2 terabyte chain, for example, and you'll still be able to come up to speed with 20 minutes, because the idea of it in the end is that you're only downloading the current state and then proving that it's accurate, as opposed to needing to go all the way back to the beginning of time and downloading everything and reconstructing everything all the way through. So it's kind of like, think of it like a snapshot in a way. You start at the end, and then you can prove it that it's correct, that you haven't got any kind of fake data, and then you can start there. And so it will make it so that you can always start up quickly, regardless of how large the chain grows or how many transactions per second there are.
Yeah, which I think is vital if we really do want to see any kind of chain, specifically Decred being used in real life, and being able to handle, large scale uses and lots of people using the chain at once, and lots of transactions happening instantaneously with that second layer. So definitely very insightful. Getting into that, I know with those things, Decrediton is going to probably be the home for a lot of those integrations. Are we going to see any massive changes for the user with Decrediton? I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right, but are these things going to be kind of like a click and go, or are you going to need to be pretty technical in order to use these as far as a user experience?
The game plan with Decrediton, and Decrediton's whole real purpose, is to take the abstract command line infrastructure that we've had with Decred for quite some time and make it more tangible and useful for people who, who don't care to be typing in, a terminal with fixed width fonts and stuff. I really enjoy that. I love to, do everything on the command line, but I totally get it. Most people don't. And, as I said in the roadmap, to some extent, until these things are in a graphical format, to a lot of users, they simply don't exist. So with that in mind, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff added to Decrediton in the next several months. Things like support for Lightning Network, support for Politeia, and what was the other one? Oh yeah, and then SPV support. So all of those things require a lot of integration in terms of Decrediton. The user experience is going to change when you don't have to download the whole chain, as Dave had alluded to before, or your chain downloads much more quickly. These things are really sort of tied into the user experience, and correspondingly, we're going to see changes on those on those fronts. In the case of Politeia, people need to be able to see the proposals. They need to be able to presumably read comments on the proposals. They need to vote on the proposals. So Decrediton is a natural place for that to occur. And then in terms of the Lightning Network, if you're going to be opening channels, you need to do that from a wallet. You need to take some of your coins and then lock them into a channel, and then you can spend from that channel. So, putting this stuff in the graphical wallet is a logical location for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts there, but yeah, it's kind of like the polished piece that the normal user would be seeing for interacting with the majority of these things.
Yeah, so even though SPV is very, very exciting, though, I do think that folks should consider still running Decrediton as it exists today as a full node, because it does help to secure the network. So I think SPV is really, really awesome for the mobile solutions, but I will continue to run Decrediton as as a full blown node. Let's help the network a little bit.
Well, I would say as far as the wallet too, the graphical side of it is, for most people, if it's not in a GUI, it doesn't exist. So, we can make a lot of these really cool tools, and they'd be great and they can work on the command line. But the reality is nobody will use them. But nobody, obviously a few people, but you get what I mean. The vast majority of the people won't use them by any means if they're not in a graphical environment. And so that's kind of the whole principle of that roadmap, is that in addition to making the back end and the infrastructure of all these neat things, you need to expose them to people in a easy to use graphical fashion if you actually want any kind of uptake on them.
Yeah, I think you guys hit the nail on the head as far as why it's important to integrate things in a very simply usable way. But again, it's not a trivial thing to integrate all of this into something that's just kind of point and click. So yeah, that's very exciting. But one thing that Marco, you kind of touched on was just like the fact of running a full node, in order to secure the network and support the network more. Getting into that a little bit, another aspect, to the network is kind of the privacy aspects. And I know this has kind of been the golden goose of the project, kind of the thing that's been kept under wraps. And so I don't know how much detail you guys can get into it, but if there's anything that you could kind of comment on the privacy side of Decred, is it going to be something that is totally original, or is it going to be more of a split or a better implementation of something that's already out there?
Yes, we're doing privacy.
That's
I'll say a little bit, which is that if you look at our past work, we're not the people who are out there writing academic papers. We're not going to drop a brand new super out of nowhere privacy technology. I mean, that's the kind of thing that literally people at highly regarded academic institutions do for their full-time job for days and days and weeks and years. And we can't replicate things like that. But I feel like the edge that we have in the context of this space is really engineering. And from an engineering perspective, what we're going to deliver will be sound engineering, and it will use things that you've heard about. And that's about where I'll stop.
No, that's great. And yeah, I know that's something that you guys are really trying to keep under wraps, but just to kind of give an idea for users what they can expect. And I think just being able to expect that polished product that works, that isn't all just about the shiny glam on the front end, but actually has solid code and solid back end and is deliverable. So thanks for that. Getting into another piece, and I think this might be one of the last pieces, but the DEX, the Decentralized Exchange piece of Decred. And I think in the blog, Jake, you had mentioned that it's going to be one of the first proposals on Politeia. If you can get into a little more detail, what does that entail? Is it going to be specific to Decred and then kind of having different projects jump on as well? Or is it going to be something that other projects can just implement on their own? Or is it going to be kind of like a hub for anyone that wants to join in all on the same platform? I don't know if that makes sense, but just kind of what is going to be the big use case? Is it going to be Decred specific, or something that houses all cryptocurrencies as far as an exchange goes, that's decentralized and available?
Well, I'll give you some context. So the context is someone who I won't name had asked me to have a look at some software that they were planning on building, and it was essentially a decentralized exchange to some extent. And when that happened, it cued me to go, well, let's have a look at what everybody else out here is doing. And I mean, I saw a distinct pattern. I looked at 4 or 5 different projects, and everyone's project basically for decentralized exchange was, how can I, you know, if I encapsulated the whole sort of existing market segment with a question, it's how can I capture the revenue that the exchanges already have? And that, the more I thought about it, the more I thought this is just, it's just casinoization, and there's no end to it. And what I'm going to propose is a method for sort of de-casinoizing the casino, and bringing us back to what the hell, what's the point of having an exchange? The point of an exchange is, in theory, supposed to be matching buys and sells, so that you can have price discovery occur, and that people pay a fair, relatively fair spot price for some asset. And I feel like, modern exchanges, whether we're talking about stock exchanges or foreign exchange or, even cryptocurrency exchanges, we've gotten very, very far away from that. And I feel like that direction is really counterproductive. As much as everybody loves to, go to the casino and mash the buttons and watch things, the lights blink and so on, I think that sort of fundamentally that's the wrong way to go. And so what I'm going to be proposing here is I'm going to propose an open, decentralized exchange. It's not going to be Decred centric at all. The reason that this all occurred to me is we've had some very interesting interactions with cryptocurrency exchanges over the past year. And sometimes this involves paying, a very high listing fee, and it's opaque, and you have to sign an NDA, and it really does, on top of the fact that it's all, basically these things are already casinos, it really calls into question, I mean, how much longer can this go on, where it's like people are paying hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to get listed on particular exchanges? It's just, I think it's ridiculous, and it's counterproductive. And so, some of the viewers might already be aware of the atomic swap tools we released. And we certainly were not the first people to do the atomic swap. However, we were the first people to release a tool that allowed people to openly perform their own atomic swaps. And, in that vein, we're going to continue in that direction by basically making this an open system where if cryptocurrency X wants to integrate with, with the infrastructure that we put out there, they're free to do it. It's not, you don't have to pay us some giant pile of money to get integrated. We'll help you do the work, but it's work that anyone should be, any decent dev should be able to do on their own. And, instead of trying to focus on how is this going to make, how is this going to make Decred super awesome, it's really a question of how are we going to make the ecosystem really awesome. I mean, Politeia is a great example of this in the sense that it's a really generic tool, and Marco and I developed it, with that in mind. The idea being that, a time-stamped Git repository where there's cryptographic attribution for things you say and do, that's extremely useful, and it can be used in all kinds of places. And the idea with the decentralized exchange proposal that I'm going to put forward is roughly speaking the same thing. And the hope is that other people see value in what I'm going to propose. And I feel like there's a lot of problems that it can solve, but whether it really captures the sort of the collective imagination of of the market remains to be seen, because people love their casinos. So you go into a casino and you tell people, I'm going to de-casinoize the casino, and then they go, yeah, I'm going to go back to the slot machine, and they keep pulling their lever. So whether it really catches on, that's a dice roll. But that's also why I'm putting it out there as a proposal. Is the idea is that I'm going to put it out there, see if other people think it's interesting, and if they do, then we're open to working with other projects, whether it's I don't know, Monero or Zcash or Litecoin or Bitcoin. We're open to it, and we just want to build the infrastructure so that we can all benefit, as opposed to remain trapped by the same paradigms that we've grown up around.
So I want to add something to that, though. Actually, so one of the things that you see in the DEX is that anyone and everyone is looking for a way to monetize that. And so if you actually look at some of the protocols that are out there, what they're doing is basically they're creating a reserve currency token that sits in the middle, right? And then the real hope there is that the token is going to up in value, so they can go buy Lambos. So I think we can do better than that. As a community, we can do better than doing another stupid token that really serves no real purpose, but to basically line the pockets of some people. So if we can leverage the atomic swap tools and actually make some sort of order book discovery, that alone would already be an innovation, right? And you take you disincentivize certain things and certain bad behaviors, like Jake was describing earlier, right? So there's much more than just casinoizing. So I think that part of making it work is going to be to align the incentives instead of having them all broken like they are right now. I mean, for all intents and purposes, so everybody knows that the exchanges really don't want decentralized exchanges, right? Because that's going to cut into their revenue. So anyway, so there's a lot to think about there, and it's not going to be a trivial problem to solve.
Well, one of the things I wanted to add in addition to all that, I think that they didn't really talk about is the fact that the existing decentralized exchanges aren't really decentralized in the sense that yes, the software runs decentralized, but the reality is you're still sending the funds to some centralized entity. There's some intermediary that exists. And one of the big promises, at least to me, that I really am excited about crypto in general, or cryptocurrencies, what they allow you to do that you simply can't do in the fiat world is it allows disintermediation and trustless exchanges. And by trustless, I mean that you and I can exchange funds and there's nobody in the middle that can possibly steal it or stop it. It's permissionless and trustless. And so a true decentralized exchange, and this is what the proposal is going to focus on, is when you use these atomic swap technologies and you actually do it in a way that is actually trustless and permissionless, as opposed to, okay, I'm running the software on a whole bunch of systems, it's decentralized. But in reality, everything's still funneled through some centralized entity. I still have to give my coins to somebody else and trust that they're going to complete the trade and then send them on to the other person on the other side of the trade. So disintermediate that completely. To me, that's one of the more exciting parts of the proposal that will focus on is the fact that you're not going to actually have, it will truly be decentralized, permissionless, and trustless, as opposed to just the software being decentralized.
Well, and there's obviously the security aspect to it, right? So, I mean, you read virtually every week that, exchange X or Y, Z was hacked again, right? So somebody lost your coins because they suck. So I want a method and a mechanism that I can basically, trade crypto with Dave without, having a third party that is honestly, frankly, a total failure in OPSEC and in InfoSec. I mean, and we see this every day in crypto. I mean, the horror stories are there. So let's get rid of that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really neat proposal. Oh, Jake, were you going to say something?
I guess that the only thing I really wanted to say is that what you'll see in this proposal is in the same vein as Bitcoin or Decred. What we're doing here is we will be using transparency to our benefit in a way that solves problems. Is I feel like there's radical transparency, which could be like, I don't know, putting a camera in my bathroom, and that's like not useful radical transparency, right? That's like creepy. You shouldn't be wanting to watch me in my bathroom, but it doesn't really solve any problems. But what we'll be doing here is we'll be using that transparency as a tool itself, as opposed to just sort of leveraging the blockchain. We'll take the blockchain plus some transparency, and we can get a whole lot of added value out of it. But as I've said before, whether people perceive this as added value or not remains to be seen. So we'll make the proposal and see where the spaghetti lands.
Yeah, no, I think it's neat, and I think with the open source movement, it's hard to see other than the casino owners, a lot of people coming up in arms towards something like that. But it is going to be a shift from the current ecosystem, but at the same time, a necessary one, especially if we do want to take away that third party. So really neat proposal, and I know a lot of people are really excited to see what comes from it. The last thing I think in the roadmap was just kind of touching on the marketing efforts of the team. And I don't know, for all of you who are tuning in, how much you've been following these different conferences and events and kind of the Twitter of the project, but it's been really neat because I know that everyone that's on this channel right now has been, or at least in this video right now, has been to a conference this year, or rather, for 2017 and going into 2018, and are planning on going to a few in the next few months. And it's just exciting to see that Decred is having a presence outside of just the code it's writing. And I know it's something that people have been really excited for, and that the tires are definitely hitting the pavement in that regard, and it's been neat. So I wasn't sure if you guys had any comments or thoughts, but yeah, I know it's been sweet for a lot of people to see the follow through in that regard.
So let me start. So as a guy who has been somewhat on the forefront of some of this, it's I got to say though, it's very tiring and it's very disruptive to the process. So even though people love to hear me yap for whatever reason, it does eat a lot of time. But I got to say though, I personally love actually the interactions with all these folks. I feel the excitement, and I kind of feel that Decred has turned the page on excitement and on people knowing the project. I've been stopped several times now, on the street, literally because I was wearing this shirt. So so I think we are turning a corner on on visibility.
In terms of marketing, we've made huge strides. We have a bunch of excellent people working with us, such as yourself, Trace, and having an ongoing presence at events. As much as we can build great technology in our respective basements or offices distributed throughout the United States and other countries, if no one ever sees this, the software, no one ever hears about it, it is in a similar fashion to, the graphical interfaces that we discussed. It's like it doesn't exist. So getting out to these events is really important from an engagement perspective, and we've been making an enormous amount of progress on these fronts. Marco's wife, Clarissa, has been making, substantial contributions on this front and making sure that we go to plenty of events and stay coordinated and stay on point. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of 2018. We've got quite a lot of things booked, and a lot more people, not just in the U.S. but outside the United States, will be seeing us in person. We're real, I swear.
Yeah, we exist, and at some point maybe we'll even get Dave to come out. I know that's really the biggest challenge of all things. He does not like to leave his cave, and we try every time. And by the way, I've seen Clarissa's spreadsheet of all the conferences and all the events, and it literally looks like that map from from Nash, that mathematician that was seeing things. That is the spider web. That is what it looks like. It's pretty insane.
I've long wondered if that's really, everyone acts like he's paranoid or he's schizophrenic. That guy was probably followed everywhere for years. So it's as much as I'm sure there's that bizarre map, I think he was onto something.
I was just pointing out the map. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, and she really has been huge, especially in coordinating the efforts, because it's really easy to talk about things, but until things are booked and people are set up and scheduled to actually be at these places, it's hard to actually make it happen. And she's been a great piece, and it's been cool to just see her coordinating. So she's watching.
Oh, I'm sure she's watching, and I'm sure she's going to criticize me later. No, but seriously, the one thing that I think is that she really changed is that the trains are running on time. So before that, we were pretty ad hoc, right? We would just show up, and then maybe we did or did not have shirts, right, or swag, or so right now, you are told you're supposed to do this by this date, and then magically things actually go just a lot smoother, and that's what we really have noticed. Like for example, in Miami, the difference between that and the one we did in Texas was just gigantic. Even though it was a much larger conference, it was just again, the trains were running on time, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think too, as this continues to get hammered out, it's going to become a more process piece, and there's going to be a more set process for getting these things to happen. So then on the smaller scale, for like me, some other community members have been going to more meetups, whether it's Bitcoin meetups or cryptocurrency meetups, to just have a more streamlined process of how to engage people at those meetups, and then eventually how to start your own local Decred meetup and just building those local communities, whether it's at the colleges that are nearby or the city that's nearby. And I think it's going to be a really neat piece.
Right. So one of the things, actually, it's related to marketing. It's a slightly different area of marketing, though. We've been having some discussions quite frequently on Slack. I'm sure people that are on there would know about it, in the sense of, Decred actually has decentralized development, and that's where we're going. So we have different teams. So C0 is one of the development teams. We're on here talking about everything we're going to do, but there are other development teams and other developers and contractors that are working that have their own roadmaps and their own ideas about what they're going to implement as well. So one of the things that I think that the project has a need for, and if you're the type of person who would want to do this, is sort of an investigative reporter type of person. This person would be somebody who looks at all the commits to GitHub. They look at all the tweets that are being made by the different teams and the different contractors that are involved. They look at all the different social media platforms, and they collate all that information and present it in an easily sort of, you can call it centralized in a way, but just in an easily digestible format. Because one of the tricky parts of having this decentralized development is the fact that a lot of people are like, okay, well, where do I go to see what's going on? Well, all the information's there, but it's across all these different developers that are all doing different commits, that are tweeting, that are putting their information on Slack, that are making Reddit posts, that are basically Telegram. So this information is out there, but it's all decentralized, as a decentralized project would be. So I do think that it's important, especially moving forward when we start going towards, the roadmap, for example, for next year, is that, to be clear, the roadmap that we're discussing today is the company zero roadmap. It's not the Decred roadmap. It's the company zero roadmap. So, we do have a need at a project level for somebody who will collate everything, I think. I think that's important to point out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. And Jake, I know you're probably going to touch on a little more of that piece, but just for people to know, and we probably should have front-loaded that aspect of just that this is the company zero roadmap. There are, a lot of different developers. If you go to the contributors page on decred.org, and it's really neat to see because company zero, I don't think they're the majority of the developers anymore, and that team's continuing to grow as far as developers go. And as Politeia comes and different teams come, there are going to be more roadmaps and more development projects happening on the side separate from company zero, which is really neat.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely took a little while. I would have loved to have a bigger base of people to work with earlier on, but it's difficult to find people who have who share a deep interest in decentralized networks and really want to see this stuff through to the end, as opposed to kind of show up, say a couple things, and go, oh, that's cool, and then sort of step away. In our case, we're here to stay for the long term because this fascinates us, and we're looking for more and more of these people. And I think that we're either at or almost at a point where the amount of non-company zero development being done is greater than the amount of company zero development being done. Right now, we're still doing a lot of the back end stuff, but there's more and more people showing up over time. It's all going the way that I would have liked, just maybe not as quickly as I would have liked.
So now I want to add one more thing. So I've also been actually pretty active here in Austin, in going to all kinds of meetups and just meeting people and seeing people and see what's going on. And Austin is actually a very interesting city when it comes to that. There is a lot of interest here in crypto. There's several large projects here in town. So that's another way that actually, if people are looking for a way to get involved in Decred, is go talk to some folks in some of these cities that have crypto presences, right? Go see what you can do. Go chill a little bit, right? And go hear out what's going on out there, right? And you meet some very interesting people that are interested in the project and would like to contribute. So we've actually hooked up some of the folks in Dallas. So they have done some presentations. It wasn't us, right? But we just enabled them, right? So we gave them some information. We proved their slides. We gave them some swag to hand out. And so that is something that people can help us with. So if you're interested to get involved, drop us a note.
Yeah, no, that's huge, Mark. And I think that's a really easy way for a lot of community members that might not have the technical know-how, but are really passionate about the project and have been studying up on the project and want to learn about the project to get involved and use their time to get the word out about what is happening and why it's exciting to be a part of the Decred community and what's going to be accomplished. So definitely a good thing to do and see what's available in your community. And now I just want to give a couple minutes for the YouTube chat if there's any questions that people have that are watching to answer, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
Yes, I really would like that yacht. I'll take it.
So someone said Decred ASIC question mark. Yeah, ASICs are coming. I know there's a couple teams working on them.
Sure. So for sure, we know that
ASIC,
we know for sure that there is at least one ASIC coming. There's probably two more based on just what people have been saying, but they definitely are on the way. And as we've mentioned before, we actually encourage them and support them in Decred because we have the fundamental means necessary to deal with misbehaving miners, which is a primary concern against ASICs and many of the other coins, because they simply, if the miners control everything and then all the mining hash power gets centralized, that's where the concern comes in. But since we actually have the hybrid proof of work, proof of stake system in order to deal with that, we don't have to be afraid of ASICs like many other coins are.
Another user asked, hardware wallet when?
Well, hold on. I want to say a little bit more about the whatever it is, the ASICs. Yeah. So there's several groups, and there's quite a bit more competition than I ever expected to see in this space. And what I think is interesting is that, just like Dave pointed out, right, there's this sovereignty question, because proof of work is the real sovereignty mechanism for most cryptocurrencies. People showing up with really fast ASICs puts people back on their heels and makes people defensive. In our case, the amount of ASICs you would need to really take over or cause problems on our network is pretty serious. And if you own a bunch of Decred, you're heavily disincentivized from really, it's like a city. If you own 25% of a city, do you want the city to burn to the ground? Probably not. Not to mention you'd lose an enormous amount of money. So the ASICs, we're all for it because it's going to happen eventually. But you were saying about hardware wallets? Hardware wallets when?
Yeah, and so I don't know if you guys have any more insight. I know that there was some things that were released about Trezor a little bit ago.
Well, sorry, Dave. But so the Trezor code has been merged in the tree. So as far as I know, it's basically waiting on a new firmware image so that it can be downloaded and can be used. Was that you were trying to say, Dave?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, Ledger is also a work in progress. We're trying to right the ship on that one, but I'd expect that it wouldn't be too difficult for them to integrate Decred, especially after they've seen the source code for Trezor.
Where can I buy a bright, shiny blue Decred jacket like Marco's?
So, Decred jacket. Let me hang on. I'm going to get you one. Let me show you. My jacket is sitting right here in the back. Look at that. This is Decred jacket. Does it show? Look at that. Yeah, yo, chew on that. So, there is a movement afoot to make a limited availability of said jackets, but it is a bit of a surprise how it's going to happen. So what's today? It's the 5th. I think the surprise is going to come out on about the 12th. So ask me again in 5 or 6 days.
Something that I figured that I mentioned that's kind of funny about the jackets is I saw a Reddit post a week or two ago about how some people don't like the jackets. They're like, this makes Decred look cheap, and they're real upset about the jackets. I don't know. I thought it was extremely funny that the jacket could upset anybody. It's incredibly eye-catching, and it creates a lot more positive attention than negative attention. I mean, until somebody gets their ass kicked wearing one of these jackets, it's pretty legit.
Yeah, they're
so I gotta say, and Jacob saw this in action actually, is if you go anywhere with this jacket, people want to wear it. So I typically only wear it for about 5 minutes, and then the rest of the room, gets a turn and takes pictures with it. It really. So I know there's some people upset about it, but screw them. It's entirely way too much fun to wear that jacket and see the reactions of people.
Yeah, and I think it's all the more reason to keep it if it's making people pissed off, because it's just like,
wait, me being contrarian? No.
Let's go with one last question. Now, I guess over the weekend someone had a question about the 50 revokes on tickets, and we're just kind of wondering what was going on in that regard. I think Dave had kind of mentioned on what he thought it was, or maybe it was Alex. I'm not sure, but do you guys have any insight for why that large quantity of revokes might have occurred?
Yeah, so a new mining pool came online, and they were not configured correctly and ended up missing a lot of tickets, and then those tickets had to be revoked. That's the short of it.
Have you considered that ancient aliens could be responsible? I just wanted to put that out there. You know,
it's the more likely. I think it's the more likely possibility, to be honest.
That's what they want you to think.
Yeah. Well, that's all we got, guys. Thank you so much for joining us again. You know, these guys are hard at work, and so stuff like this takes away from that actual coding. But I know it's important to kind of get an idea of what these aspects in the roadmap look like going forward for the community. So thank you so much for your time. Again, if you guys have questions, definitely make sure you jump in on the Slack. And a lot of the other fundamentals of the project that are already developed do have episodes from Decred Assembly in the history of the channel. So definitely check them out. Definitely check out the decred.org website. That's a great resource to kind of get you started. And all these different links are in the description. So thanks again for joining us. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the chat.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Take care, everyone.